Hey everyone, Sarah Kaki here with Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and I have our very own amazing attorney, Stephanie Whale, with me. Stephanie, welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. Glad to be here.
Of course. And Stephanie, we're going to talk about today one of an areas that's actually very niche to your practice and your experience, and great advice that you're always able to give our clients when they're facing this, which is divorcing a narcissist.
Yeah.
We've talked quite a bit through our Facebook page, just general topics of what is it like to divorce a narcissist, what are some general tips for divorcing a narcissist. But today specifically, we're going to talk about how to budget financially to divorce a narcissist and how that plays into the strategy. I think that's probably one of the biggest fears people have when they're facing a high conflict divorce is how do I actually budget and prepare mentally for what I'm going to end up in attorney's fees, what it's going to happen to the income of the household, the assets of the household, and how do I strategize for all that? Am I going to be able to find an attorney that gets all that and doesn't treat this as any other divorce and it gets dragged through the mud? You have some great advice that you always share with our clients on this, and I'm always on the side taking notes. So I thought, why don't we just bring this out and talk about it live?
Yeah.
One of the first things we do, as you and I and the rest of the team here does, is we're very clear on the fact that our clients need to know exactly what is their number one priority when they're going through a divorce. And one of the things you talk about is how that is especially most important in divorcing a narcissist or being in a high conflict divorce. Can you talk a little bit about why gaining that clarity on what is the ultimate goal I want out of my divorce, how that's especially so important in a divorce with a narcissist?
Sure. I think a lot of times people think when they're going to get divorced from a narcissist, they know it's going to be a battle. There's a lot of information out there about how it's going to be high conflict and it's going to be difficult. But what I think people don't understand is that it can be a situation that they're going to end up getting what they want out of it, but they have to be strategic. They have to be smart. You don't want to just get a bulldog who's going to go into court and fight. They need to be very smart and deliberate in the moves that they make. And unless you know what your number one priority is, what you want out of that divorce, what does your life look like when this divorce is finished, we can get you to that place, but we need to know what that is, because we're going to have to use that sort of as a bargaining chip going forward.
Yeah, so let's talk about that bargaining chip, because you said something that's really intelligent, which is a lot of people out there say, I want a bulldog to handle my divorce. And our managing partner, Shauna, here always says in a high conflict divorce, you actually don't want a bulldog, you want a fox. And the reason for that is the fox can actually plan and strategize 10 steps ahead of what's to come, and even let go of some smaller battles to fight to win the bigger war. And let's talk about how being very clear on what it is you want ultimately from the divorce can help you strategize how to be a fox in the game against what the narcissist wants. Because what we all know about a narcissist is that they are actually going to take what's really dear to you and wave it around you as a carrot, because they feed off of the drama, and this process feeds their high conflict personality. So talk me through how we can use my priorities and the narcissist priorities for me to leverage that like a fox in court rather than a bulldog.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing you need to know is you need to know your narcissist. Who is your narcissist? Narcissism is a spectrum, like a lot of different, disorders. You're going to have your, sociopathic, on the one end, down to on the other end, just some narcissistic tendencies or habits. What we see in our practice is we see all of that, but you need to know your narcissist and what is his currency, because I say his, it can be a her. Every narcissist has a currency. It's what do they value? What gives them worth? Because one thing that all narcissists have in common on the entire spectrum is that there are things that they need to get supply. So, for instance, let's use an example of a case that I've actually done before. the husband and the wife had a beach house, and that beach house provided him, the husband, a lot of self-worth. It was something that made him feel important. They would have friends to go stay at the beach house, and the wife just wanted custody of the kids. She could care less about the beach house. So what we did and how we crafted her strategy is when she met with us day one, what do you want? I want full custody of my children. I want primary custody. Okay, tell me what he wants. What is he going to go to the mattresses over? And it was the beach house. So all of a sudden we decided, well, we're going to go for the beach house. We made the beach house a huge production. We did lots of discovery demands, and the discovery is where we're demanding information about certain things, and they have to provide that, and vice versa. But we made the beach house like a focus of that divorce. And what ended up happening, instead of going to trial, we ended up at mediation. Most cases are ordered to mediation, and we started off in mediation. We want that beach house. And by the end, we got the custody arrangement that she wanted, and he got the beach house, because our client didn't really care about the beach house. So we were smart, and we didn't end up in trial. And had we just gone fight all the way, we would have gone to trial. But I feel like that was a really smart way to handle that case. And that's typical in almost every case with the narcissist. There's something, Sarah, that they value, whether that's their house, whether that's their car, whether that's the country club membership, investment accounts that they love to, we've had this in a couple cases where they really love to sit at the computer at night and invest.
Profile.
Yeah, and so you have to decide what is the currency that they deal in, what gives them value and self-worth so that they can appear successful and appear important to other people, and that's what you go for. And then in the end, hopefully, if you have an attorney who is smart like a fox and who can negotiate well for you, you're going to end up getting what you want.
So I love the phrase, the narcissist currency. And that's something I've gained from you. And it's just such a brilliant way to put it, because what you're basically saying is that there is something that is very near and dear to the narcissist that we phrase as the narcissist currency. And we have to basically strategize this case from the lens of that currency. And so even though our client in that situation did not care about the beach house, wanted the children, we had to basically strategize and say what we care about is the beach house as well, so that later on, when we came to actually push comes to shove, what are we willing to give up? What are they willing to give up? We were able to use giving up the beach house in exchange for a better custody arrangement for our client. And that makes the narcissist feel extra special because they get to win. And right. How important is that for their psychology?
Narcissists have to win. And I think that's why, anyone who tells you about divorcing a narcissist, whether they be friends or in the legal field, they're going to tell you, be prepared, because they don't want to settle. They have to win, even to their own detriment. They'll spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees just to beat you. Even if, like I said, it's to their own detriment. So if you can give them something to make them feel like they've won, like the beach house example, or in another case, maybe it's a precious antique vehicle that they've been working on, you go for that thing, and then eventually you let them have it so they feel like they've won or gotten something over you. And that's how you can resolve a case with a narcissist, but you have to be very strategic in the decisions you make.
And it takes a high level of personal awareness, not only on your part, but also on your attorney's part. Because, if you are a person that likes to be right and likes to say, I won, and a lot of us are like that, anybody that has any kind of competitive nature, you enjoy winning, you enjoy being competitive and getting to say, I won. But in these divorces, that can be detrimental to you getting the ultimate thing you want. And that's why it's so important, the onset, saying, what's more important to you? Being able to say, I won, looking at the narcissist, or actually getting what you want? Because in that scenario, she was able to get her children, the ultimate goal, right, by letting the narcissist feel like he won, which just takes a lot of personal awareness and self-security to let go of that.
Right.
And that's also why it's so important, I think, to have a fox rather than a bulldog, because The bulldog wants to come in loud in court, the attorney, right? And just
That's right.
pound their chest and say, we won, my client wins, where that could be actually detrimental to your client.
Absolutely. And one thing that you just said that really jumped out at me, Sarah, was that you have to have a lot of, self-awareness. A lot of people who are married to narcissists are kind of beaten down.
Yeah.
Their psyche is beaten down. Their self-esteem is eroded. You really need to get a team in place. And that's not just your legal team. Your legal team is critical because they're the ones that are acting on your behalf in court and the legal process. But you need a team to back you up through the process with your own self-esteem issues. And you have to reach out to people. And the interesting thing about narcissism is that a lot of people around you, your family, may think they're wonderful. So they may be surprised that you're struggling and that you have these issues. But you need to get a good therapist. You need to tell your family, your close friends, and build your team as this process kind of unfolds. And, get them on your side and help them to help you through the process, whether that's emotionally, financially, in any way they can. It does take a village. It really, really does.
And I think a good strategy sits there and actually lists the team out. I think it's such a wonderful thing that you're saying, to really think about who's on your team, and in life generally, just always thinking to yourself, like, who's on my team, whatever goal it is I want to achieve, even outside of divorce. But strategically, in a divorce, in a high conflict, dramatic divorce, you probably need to sit down and even mention it to your attorney. And these are people that I can count on, that are on my team, because that also could make our options a little bit more flexible on, okay, where could you go while we're in the heat of the process? Who could you, confide in? What are some other options we have in case we have to let go of this battle for the sake of the war? Now, let me put this on you, because I think a lot of people are going to ask this if they are a parent. They're going to say, well, if my number one goal is the children, and the narcissist spouse, their number one goal is also the children, what then? And I think I know your answer to this, but it goes back to the psychology of the narcissist, and I'd love to hear you share all that live.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, but true narcissists, not people with, little bitty narcissistic tendencies, which, truthfully, a lot of people have. A true narcissist really doesn't value anyone but themselves. So when you, the non-narcissistic spouse, says, my priority, my number one goal is to get the child, and then we see that the narcissist spouse wants the children too, they don't really value the children. There's something about the children that appeals to them. I can recall a case one time where a child was an excellent, she was a competition cheerleader. And that was something that the narcissistic spouse got a lot of supply from. Taking the child to the competitions, interacting with the other parents, all of those things. We were actually able to craft an agreement where we gave the narcissistic spouse, the non-narcissistic spouse, our client, ended up with full custody, but the narcissistic spouse got final decision-making on extracurriculars. And that was all that parent needed in order to get that supply they wanted, because they knew then they could control the competition cheerleading and be the one to make sure the child was enrolled in all of those things. And that's what you have to really figure out. You know your spouse better than anyone. If they're going for the kids and you're going for the kids, you need to figure out what is it about the kids that's making them, really push for it, apart from trying to hurt you. If that's really their currency is the children, not just an attempt to win, figure out what it is about the experience with the children that they're really drawn to. It's more often than not, it's not the actual children. It's something that the children bring to them.
So you have your own narcissistic divorce language, and I don't know if you even realize it because it's so good. You just said supply, and get the narcissist, give them their supply. And what you mean by that is their status, correct?
That's right. And every narcissist gets a supply.
And so that's really, if you want a shortcut to how do I find out what is going to be their currency, based on Stephanie's advice, is what is it that gives them status to make them feel special? And this kind of ties into what you were also saying earlier about typically when you're divorcing a narcissist, you're really beaten down because they've isolated you. They've made you feel like the crazy one because everybody else around you in your life, they've charmed the hell out of them and Probably even family and friends think that you're the one that's crazy because he or she is wonderful. How could you not love him? So how difficult does it become then to financially do this? Because a lot of people depend on family and friends to get divorced, and a divorce with a narcissist can actually get more expensive. So let's talk about the budgeting piece, and let's talk about, first of all, how do you pay for divorcing a narcissist? Obviously, first option would be go to family and friends if you're financially dependent on the narcissist. But from the scenario you described, which I think is a very common one, a lot of people can't depend on family and friends because they're not supportive of your divorce because they think your spouse is a wonderful person. They haven't seen what it's like to live with them. What are other options?
I think what you typically find in a narcissistic scenario in a divorce is that the narcissist has a lot of control over the finances. They are often the breadwinner, and if they're not the breadwinner, or it's equal contributions to the marriage, they're really the ones controlling the purse strings. They're the ones controlling the checking account, and they're keeping track of it. So what you have to do, whether or not you're providing financially for the family or not, you need to start having access to money. What I advise people is that if you don't have the money to pay for an attorney, you need to figure out how to get it. And you may, like you said, if you approach family and friends, they may not be supportive of the divorce because they've been charmed. So I've told clients to do things as a stay-at-home mom before. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to Kroger or Publix, take out some extra cash when you're getting your groceries back, because it won't show up on the receipt that you were getting cash. You need to plan and be strategic. And that's something that you're going to see through the whole process, but especially when you're getting your finances together. Apply for a credit card. Don't put anything on the card so you're not having statements sent to the house. Maybe have the statement sent to another friend's house so he doesn't even know that this card exists. And I'm saying he, it can be she. You need to be very strategic. So that if that means, Sarah, that you can't file right away, maybe you need 4 to 5 months, 6 months to get enough money together so you can get that attorney who knows how to deal and get you out of this situation and on your feet. That's usually wise. Now, of course, if you're reacting to it, and let's say the narcissist is filing, you're going to have to do whatever it takes, in that situation. But typically, you're going to see the non-narcissistic spouse is the one who finally is having their, I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. But you may not be able to pull the trigger right when you want to. You're going to have to be very strategic and build up those reserves and get that credit that you can get out.
And Stephanie, just so that people actually have some numbers in mind, I think it's very, it can be very stressful when people are trying to prepare and budget for this, and they can't ever get straight numbers from most attorneys that they speak to. And I understand, because you never really know in litigation, right? So much of this is driven by the opposing party and what kind of drama they're bringing in that can or cannot be accounted for. So that's one of the reasons it's so important to sort of forecast the narcissist behavior 10 steps ahead, so we can strategize and reverse engineer of, okay, we do, X, we think they're going to do Y, and we can zigzag back and forth, kind of knowing the forecast of behavior. But let's say this does go to trial. What is a ballpark number that you would say a person would have to budget for if divorcing a narcissist would potentially go to trial here in Georgia?
Like you said, it's a really difficult question to answer. And I tell people, if you're talking about a household income of less than $200,000 and you have some children and there's no abuse or anything of that nature that's going to require, Department of Family and Children's Services to be involved, anything like that, or restraining orders, anything of that nature, I tell them to budget for about $25,000. That's with, very sort of standard discovery responses. And when we ask them for their financial information and vice versa, I tell them to budget for $25,000. It could go north of that. But the idea is, if you know kind of a ballpark of your worst case scenario, and like you said, reverse engineer that, we can kind of try to get you to that settlement, which is going to be a lot less money. But we have to be super smart about it. But if we know from the outset there's a great likelihood we're going to trial, that way what you're going to need to do to get there. And when we talk about getting credit cards and getting your family to help you if they will, and taking money out, cash, whatever, we're not telling or asking you to come up with $25,000. Right. If you're the spouse that doesn't work, or you make a lot less money, we go into court right away and ask the court to give you attorney's fees, to have the other party pay for those. So there's ways we can help you get money throughout the process. We just need you to get enough to get going, and to get going with the right firm. And one thing that I love about ADLG is that we actually budget with all of our clients, regardless of whether or not it's a narcissist, because we want our clients to know what we think based on what they're telling us is their number one priority financially, what their commitment is going to be to that. A lot of firms don't do that. And like you said, they base that on saying, well, we don't know what the other side is going to do. We don't either, but we want you to have a full picture of what it's going to be and what it's going to take to get what your number one priority is.
And I think it's so important for consumers of attorney services, specifically in divorce, to feel that they can actually make a difference in the strategy by sitting down with their attorney and let them know, this is the psychology and the dynamic of my household and of how things have always operated. And for that to be part of the strategy, because like we said, so much of this depends on every action has a reaction of the high conflict personality. And from the onset of what you mentioned, if we know what his or her currency is, and if we know what gives him or her status, that is an identity piece that they're not going to want to be in loss of, then we have so much information already that we can use to forecast behavior and forecast how litigation is going to play out. And that leads me to how important it is in these type of cases, the complex divorce cases, especially because of a high conflict personality, to prepare for trial from the onset and sort of with the hope for settlement. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, most divorces that we deal with, we encourage settlement. As a family law profession, I think as on the whole, most attorneys don't want you to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a trial, especially with kids. We want you to come to an amicable resolution that gets you, what you want and gets you out of your divorce and gets you back on your feet. But you can't approach a divorce with a narcissist like you would with, I want to call it a normal person, for lack of a better word, but you have to prepare for war, because that's what they're going to be preparing for. But we're, like you said, we're not talking about, the red coats, marching up right with the guns right in their face. We're talking about, ninja war. That's what we're preparing for.
I love that.
And we have to be ready to, be, like you said, be strategic in our decision making. But you can't look at this. You have to kind of put your what seems reasonable and normal aside in the beginning, and really be strategic from the beginning. So maybe that means filing a flurry of pleadings in the beginning, asking for fees, asking for temporary support, trying to get them kicked out of the house, like super aggressive in the beginning, because then we know that they are going to be starting to fear losing that thing that is their currency, their supply. And so, we find that one of the things we do pretty frequently here is when we have a case like this, we go hard in the beginning. And you often find that gives them a little bit of fear of losing that supply, and then they're ready to settle. So, it is kind of counterintuitive in a lot of ways, but that's what's so critical. When you have that intake or that consultation with a family law attorney, you need to be very clear that you're divorcing a narcissist, what that supply is, what is that currency that they value so dearly, and what your priorities are. If you can't articulate that clearly, you're going into a bloodbath. That's just a fact. So if it takes you meeting with a firm, trying to get a good feel for them, trying to understand that they understand what you're asking for and what they can do for you, and they need to be able to communicate back to you what they do and how they deal with narcissists. Be clear with their plan as well. If you can get all of that, maybe then you need to take a few months back to get your gumption up, get your finances together, but be strategic, be ready for war. But
whoever you work with needs to be able to give you a strategy that goes with a budget, because there's nothing that a narcissist loves more than for this process to just drag on. This process makes them feel special. This process could actually give them some piece of status, some piece of currency, just as you're describing, because now they get to go to their family and friends and woe's me, I'm the victim of this terrible divorce. He or she's leaving me. And the drama feeds that endless cycle of the high conflict personality.
Sure.
One of the things that you always talk about in your strategy sessions and how you budget for these is how important the speed of time in these cases are in moving it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I completely, what you said is completely 100% true. They love to drag these out typically. There is some type of sick supply they get from being in a high conflict divorce, whether it's the control or the misery they're inflicting on their spouse, or it's supply they're getting from friends and family. Oh, woe is me. But they thrive on this as a whole. That's what we see in almost every case. We push the speed and the pace of the case as fast and as hard as we can, especially because we want to be the ones setting the pace, not being so reactionary, but being more offensive than defensive. The faster the case goes, it gives them less time to make you squirm in your misery. And so we really, really do strategize and make that part of our strategy.
One of the final things I just want to leave this with is overall, I mean, you've mentioned this, but I want to make sure anybody that's watching this really understands this. All professional divorce attorneys would want probably nothing more for their client than to not have to go to trial, because that probably means we are more in control of the outcome than if we were to leave it completely in the hands of a third party as the judge that doesn't at the end ask you, are you okay with this, or are you okay with this? He or she's going to come up with the conclusion that he finds to be the most equitable in the situation. Whereas all along before we reach that point, we're still getting to agree to the outcome. We still are in a place of power where we in control of saying, I agree to this or I don't agree to this. So even though we're talking about preparing for trial, the ultimate outcome is a reasonable settlement. But in these cases, it is preparing for trial, strategizing as if you're going to trial, makes the outcome of a reasonable settlement a lot more likely, rather than if you from the onset said, well, we'll just negotiate this out, we'll settle this, we will do things very informally, we will just, go to the mediation conference right off the bat, or we'll go to the negotiation table right off the bat. This kind of a divorce requires a different strategy that has a trial preparation from the onset. And that is, as counterintuitive as it is, as Stephanie's teaching us, it is actually what drives us closer to a settlement, rather than sitting back and being sort of, well, we hope to settle this and we're going to prepare as we're settling for this. Because there is something about the formal process that snaps the narcissist a little bit more into shape and makes them not be able to drive this train off the tracks. Stephanie, this is, you're so good at this. You're so awesome about speaking about narcissists. You understand it and give our clients the kind of support that I feel like they don't necessarily feel heard otherwise. So I really appreciate you taking time off of your crazy trial and court schedule to give us this bit of information. It was just too valuable to not share it. Is there anything else you feel like we should discuss before we go off?
I just want people to know there is light at the end of the tunnel. Even divorcing a narcissist, you can put that past you and start a really great second chapter in your life. No matter how it feels right now, it will get better. And, we're honored to help our clients, move into that next chapter of their life and get there happily ever after. It's what everyone really deserves.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me.